The grand dining hall of the five-star restaurant glittered like a palace of light and sound. Crystal chandeliers cascaded brilliance across polished marble floors, their glow reflecting in the fine cutlery that adorned every table. The air was alive with the delicate notes of a live piano drifting from the corner, each chord melting seamlessly into the gentle hum of laughter and conversation. Guests, dressed in their finest, glided across the room with a kind of elegance born of wealth and long practice. Men in tailored suits spoke with practiced confidence, their every gesture deliberate, while women in shimmering gowns leaned gracefully against velvet chairs, their diamonds catching the chandelier's light like a constellation scattered across the hall. The room pulsed with sophistication, a stage for wealth and power to perform in perfect harmony. Yet, amidst this glittering display, a striking figure sat apart, commanding attention not through excess but through restraint. At a small table in the corner, a woman in her 70s rested with quiet dignity. She wore a dark kimono-style dress, simple but regal, a garment that seemed to belong more to tradition than fashion trends. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her face lined not merely by the years she had lived, but by decades of experience, of battles fought in silence, of empires built with determination. Every wrinkle on her skin spoke of endurance. In her hand, she clutched a small silver pendant, her fingers trembling as though it were both anchor and shield. Whispers traveled like shadows across the tables nearest to her, "That's the Japanese businesswoman who built an empire in Tokyo." Others speculated in hushed tones, "She's here in New York on investment matters." Whatever the details, her reputation preceded her, and the room, so skilled in masks of refinement, betrayed flickers of awe whenever eyes lingered on her. But tonight, her presence carried something different, something softer, something almost fragile. She had come alone, without assistance, without translators, without the armor of her usual entourage. When the waiter placed the thick leather-bound menu before her, her eyes scanned the lines of English, but the letters blurred into confusion. She tried, gently at first, to speak. Her voice, though low and melodic, faltered under the weight of unfamiliar syllables. A few broken phrases escaped her lips, heavily accented and fractured, their meaning lost in translation. Around her, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Where moments ago there had been admiration, now there was unease. Guests avoided her gaze, hiding smirks behind champagne glasses, their judgments whispered like poisoned confetti. Even the waitstaff, though polite, exchanged uneasy glances, their attempts at understanding clumsy and strained. The servers raised their voices as though volume could bridge the gap, pointing at items on the menu with forced smiles, but the woman only grew more distressed. Her hands shook more visibly now. She lowered her gaze, the pendant pressed firmly against her chest as if she were drawing strength from its weight. In her eyes flickered a loneliness that no fortune could erase, a silent truth that money could build empires, but not companionship, not understanding. The restaurant, which had moments earlier been a stage for elegance and power, had now become a theater of isolation for her. She sat surrounded by opulence, yet cut off from it entirely, her silence heavier than any diamond in the room. At the far side of the dining hall, a young waitress named Emily had been watching. Unlike the polished servers assigned to the wealthiest patrons, Emily was new, her uniform plain, her movements brisk but tinged with nervous energy. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the VIP tables. Her tasks were the quiet, overlooked ones, refilling glasses, clearing plates, delivering water. She often kept her head down, her messy ponytail bouncing as she hurried from table to table. Her name tag catching the faintest glimmer of light when she moved. She had learned quickly that in places like this, invisibility was a form of safety. But tonight, invisibility warred with something deeper stirring within her. Emily's eyes lingered on the elderly woman, her struggle striking something painfully familiar. She remembered nights in her childhood kitchen, watching her grandmother sit at the table, her hands wrapped around a teacup, speaking only in Japanese while the rest of the family slipped easily into English. Emily had been the bridge then, the small girl who had learned to translate, fumbling at first but growing sharper with each word. Her grandmother had never mastered English, not fully, and Emily had often felt like her voice in the world. She carried that memory quietly into adulthood, a skill hidden away because it had no place in her day-to-day life. Until now. As she watched the woman clutch her pendant, a ripple of empathy coursed through Emily. It wasn't just pity, it was recognition, the memory of being the only person who could transform confusion into clarity, the only one who could soften the sharp edges of isolation. She hesitated, torn between duty and instinct. Her manager was already watching, whispering sharply to another server, his irritation at the failed communication growing by the second. Emily knew it wasn't her table, and stepping forward could mean reprimand or worse. But the sight of the woman's trembling hands, her silent plea for understanding, pressed heavily on Emily's heart. For the first time that evening, she stopped moving, frozen in place, her decision balanced on the edge of memory and courage. She wasn't supposed to intervene. It wasn't her table, it wasn't her responsibility, and every rule of the polished establishment told her to stay in her lane. Yet as Emily stood there, clutching a tray of empty glasses against her chest, she felt her heart pressing her forward with a force stronger than caution or fear. Something inside her refused to let the scene unfold in silence. The sight of the elderly woman, so dignified yet so utterly alone, stirred memories that went far deeper than the polished marble walls and glittering chandeliers around them. With a breath that trembled but did not falter, Emily gathered her courage and stepped across the shining floor, her plain shoes sounding almost defiant against the hush of expensive leather soles and delicate heels. Guests turned their heads, curiosity flickering in their eyes, as this young waitress, out of place among the tailored waiters and suited staff, made her way toward the corner table. The older woman lifted her head as Emily drew near, her eyes filled with restrained despair, her trembling hands clutching the pendant at her chest as though it were a lifeline. Emily bent slightly, lowering herself so her voice could reach without intrusion, and then she spoke, softly, carefully, in Japanese. The transformation was immediate and breathtaking. The woman's eyes widened, disbelief shimmering like light on water, and for a suspended second, she seemed carved in stone, frozen between hope and heartbreak. Then Emily repeated herself, her voice gentle but sure, and the woman's lips parted. Her chest rose with a sharp breath, and tears glistened, unbidden, in her eyes. Relief washed across her face like sunlight piercing storm clouds. Her back straightened, her trembling eased, and the corners of her mouth lifted into a fragile, luminous smile, the first she had worn that night. What followed was nothing short of miraculous. Words began to pour from the woman, fluid and graceful, her Japanese rich with emotion and nuance, spilling over like water long dammed. Emily answered her with ease, their voices weaving together like two instruments long meant to play in harmony. The diners around them fell into silence, their smirks and whispered judgments dissolving into awe as they watched this extraordinary exchange unfold. The once isolated millionaire, a woman whose wealth had commanded respect but not understanding, was suddenly laughing softly, her voice threaded with gratitude. Emily listened attentively, translating her meal preferences to the kitchen, guiding her through the menu, and ensuring she felt not just served, but cared for. A simple act, the gift of understanding, had restored her dignity, transforming a humiliating ordeal into a moment of connection that illuminated the entire room. Throughout the evening, Emily stayed nearby, stepping in whenever the woman needed her, quietly offering the bridge between two worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart only minutes earlier. The grand dining hall, filled with those who prided themselves on refinement, bore witness to a lesson they had not expected. In a place where status, wealth, and appearance usually ruled supreme, it was not the gleaming suits, polished accents, or crystal glasses that brought true comfort. It was the compassion of a young waitress, an invisible girl with a messy ponytail, who remembered the language of her grandmother and chose to use it. The irony was not lost on the guests. The richest woman in the room had been rescued, not by fortune or position, but by kindness. The Japanese businesswoman, who had long been admired for her empire and investments, felt something that night she had not felt in years. She was not being courted, flattered, or praised for her power. She was being seen, simply, gently as a human being longing to be understood. As the meal came to an end and she prepared to leave, she reached for Emily's hand. Her grip, surprisingly strong despite her trembling earlier, held on with an urgency that made Emily's breath catch. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, the diamond light of the chandeliers glinting off each drop as she whispered words only Emily understood. They were words of gratitude, of blessing, of connection deeper than wealth could measure. Emily, blinking back her own tears, nodded softly, unable to do more than bow her head in return. When the woman finally rose and was escorted out by her driver, the restaurant buzzed in a different tone. Hushed conversations rippled across the room, not of ridicule, but of wonder. Some guests were humbled, others inspired, and a few looked almost ashamed of their earlier amusement. Even Emily's strict manager, who had frowned and bristled when she first stepped forward, stood a little quieter than usual. His expression softened as though he finally recognized that what Emily had done was worth more than the crispest table setting or the most polished glass. For once, the rigid hierarchy of fine dining bent to something greater. But the story did not end at that table, nor did the impact of Emily's courage fade with the night. A few weeks later, while she was polishing glasses at the back counter, Emily received an envelope addressed to her in careful handwriting. She opened it with curiosity, only to find a handwritten note in Japanese inside, accompanied by a formal invitation. Her breath caught as she read. The letter was from the very same woman she had helped, expressing her gratitude once more. She invited Emily to attend a cultural foundation event in the city, not as a server, but as an honored guest. And folded neatly inside was something even more life-changing, a scholarship offer. The woman had taken the time to learn more about her rescuer and had discovered that Emily was a community college student studying languages, quietly working night shifts to scrape together enough to continue her education. The letter explained, in graceful Japanese script, that she wished to sponsor Emily's studies. She saw potential in the young waitress, a voice that could bridge cultures and bring understanding where there had once been division. It was, she wrote, the least she could do for the girl who had once reached across silence and lifted her out of loneliness. Emily's hands shook as she read, her vision blurring with tears. She had never imagined that her small act of kindness, an instinct born from memories of her grandmother's kitchen table, would ripple outward in such a way. The scholarship was more than financial support, it was belief, validation, a recognition that her heart and her heritage were not burdens to be hidden but gifts to be cherished. That night, for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to dream without fear. Years later, Emily would look back on that evening as the moment her life truly began to change. She would stand on stages as a professional translator, her voice carrying across countries and conferences, bridging languages, cultures, and divides. She would travel the world, her words opening doors for others just as she had once opened a door for a lonely woman in a glittering restaurant. And every time she stood at a podium or guided someone through words they could not understand, she remembered the tears in that woman's eyes, the hush that fell over a room full of wealthy strangers, and the powerful truth that had revealed itself so clearly. Dignity and kindness, she learned, are more valuable than riches. And sometimes, the smallest, most unexpected voice carries the power to change everything.